Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am Tiffany Smith, and I'm an instructor with Wilton. I am going to be walking you through how to make some beautiful fall fondant covered cookies today. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that today's class is being recorded, so you will be able to check that out on the YouTube channel as early as tomorrow, and then the class will be posted on michaels.com by early next week. I also want to let you know that I have my colleague Robin Mueller behind the scenes giving me a hand today. She's going to be checking out the chat box, so if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in there, and she'll make sure that we get those questions answered for you. So let's get started. Felicia, if you could just switch to the close-up camera, I want to show everybody what we're going to be creating together today. So I've got 3 different cookie designs that I'm going to take you through. What is really great about these designs is that you can use these cookies as edible place cards for your Thanksgiving gathering this year. I've actually started with just some round cookies. You can either make them from scratch using your favorite cutout recipe, or you can even pick them up from your local supermarket bakery. I would just stay away from any flavor that has like chunks in it. I wouldn't get chocolate chip. Stick with maybe a sugar cookie or a molasses, nothing with raisins or nuts, because you want a nice smooth surface. So when you place the fondant on, you're not going to see those little lumps from your chocolate chips or the raisins or anything like that. So you're going to want to start with maybe like a 2.5 to 3 inch round cookie. That would be a good size. And so I rolled these out and used one of the cutters from the double cutout set. These are available at Michaels. So 6 of these come in a package, and I just used the largest cutter. This one is actually about 1 5/8, so that gives you an idea of the size cookie. I really wouldn't go any smaller than 2.5 inches, just because it's really going to limit you to, if you want to personalize them, it's going to limit you to how much space you have to write someone's name or a short message, and then you'll be limited to how many of the decorations you can put on. So what's really cool about these cutters is they're 2-sided. So there's a straight side, and then there's sort of a crinkle side, depending on the look that you want. So it's almost like getting 12 cutters in a 6-pack. So I'll be using these today, as well as a couple other shapes that I'll show you shortly. So what I want to do is just take you through some of the fondant basics before we get started. For those of you that maybe have never worked with fondant before, I am going to be using the Decorator Preferred Fondant from Wilton. This is available at Michaels. I'm just using the package of white today, but do know that the fondant is also available pre-colored if you don't want to add your own color. I'm going to be showing you how you can add icing color to it to color it yourself. Since we're going to be using so many different colors and different shades today, it's just more economical to start with the white in this case and add our own color. If you've never worked with fondant before, there's a few tools you're going to want to make sure that you have handy. First of all, fondant dries out pretty quickly if you're just not handling it. So what you want to make sure that you have available are some resealable bags and some plastic wrap. If you don't have any of the resealable bags, you could just use an airtight container. So anytime you've opened your fondant and you're not handling it, you are going to want to tuck it away in that container or that resealable bag until you need it again. And then at the very end of class today, I'm going to show you how you can wrap it up properly so your leftovers will not dry out and you'll be able to use them for another project later on. Something else you're going to want to make sure that you have handy is a rolling pin, or this is actually a 9-inch fondant roller that is available at Michaels. I love to use this because it's just a little one that's perfect for the size fondant that we're going to be working with today. If you don't have one like this, you could just use a regular rolling pin. That's perfectly fine. You're also going to want to make sure that you have some cornstarch or some powdered sugar as well, because we will be rolling out the fondant. Before you do that, though, you're going to want to sprinkle your surface with a little bit of powder to prevent sticking. You'll also want to make sure that you've got a nice, clean surface to work on. Fondant does somehow pick up a lot of lint and dirt. So obviously you need to make sure your hands are very clean, but you'll want that nice clean surface. I'm working with what's called a roll and cut mat today that you can pick up at Michael's as well. If you don't have one of those, you could just use this is the roll and cut mat right here. You could just use like a large silicone mat, or you could use maybe a large cutting board if you want. We're not going to be cutting on the surface with anything sharp today. So even if you don't have something to protect your countertop, it's not super important with today's project. But in general, when you're working with fondant, this mat works really great. And then I also want to show you this neat little gadget. So this is a dust in store pouch. I use this to keep my, my cornstarch in for when I need to dust the surface. Let me show you how this works. So you just screw off the top, and then you can spoon your powdered sugar or cornstarch right in there. Put the top back on, and then this little gray rim will untwist. And there's your pouch right there, all set to dust your surface. This works really well because just a very fine amount of powder will come out. You know, if you don't have this, it's okay, but you just want to be real careful when you are trying to dust your surface. If you're just going to sprinkle it on with your fingers, that you just try to get a very light amount on your surface, because if you get carried away with the powder on your surface, it can dry out the fondant. So then when you go to roll it out, it could end up getting cracks in it, and it'll just look really dry and lumpy. So it is nice to have this to get that nice fine powder. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you before I walk you through each of the designs is how to color the fondant. So it comes in a package like this. It's sort of like a brick. And I'm just going to use a spatula to cut a piece off here. And before you do anything with your fondant, when you grab a fresh piece, you always want to start by kneading it to get it nice and soft and pliable. So I'm going to go ahead and stick what I'm not using right over in this bag. I'm not really going to bother to seal it shut. If I just fold it over, that's good enough for now. So I've cut off a piece, so it just comes like this. And when I try to break it, you can see it very easily breaks apart. We want to knead it until it gets nice and soft and pliable and is a little more stretchy. As far as how long you knead it, it really depends on how much fondant you're using. I don't have a lot here, so we don't have to knead it too long. But you can see that the more I work with it, now it's starting to stretch compared to when I first took it out of the package and it really just broke apart.
Tiffany?
All right. Yep.
There's a question about the dust in store pouch.
Sure.
Michael's does sell this, right? Correct?
Yes, they do. Yep. Actually, any of the tools I'm using today that I'm talking about, you should be able to find at Michael's.
Yep, the dust in store dusting pouch.
Right. Okay, so to color our fondant, I'm going to be using this Icing Color. This is also a Wilton product. It comes in a just a little jar like this. You can buy them individually, or you can buy them as an 8-pack. So what we're going to do, you can normally use this to color your buttercream icing or royal icing, but it's great to also color your fondant with. So what you would do is just take a toothpick and take some out. And then we're just going to put it right in the fondant like this. And this is actually more like a gel or a paste consistency. It's not like those liquid squeeze bottles that you would typically get at the grocery store. The icing color here, that's the paste consistency, really works out better because it's not going to change the consistency of the fondant like the squeeze bottles will. So as you can see, I'm just kind of working in the color. We want to just keep folding. You can twist it and fold it just to kind of get that all blended in. Once it's blended, you can decide if you want it a little bit darker, and I can see already that I am going to want to make it a little bit brighter or darker.
Tiffany, can you talk a little bit about the gel icing color and how long it will last once you open the container?
Yeah, so it lasts a really long time, and because it's a highly concentrated color, you only need a really small amount, so you can get a good 24 months out of this. Now, you'll notice I'm going to take a new toothpick to grab more paste out of here, and that's real important to extend the shelf life of your icing color. You always want to grab a fresh toothpick, because when you go to first touch the fondant to apply the color, you might have some excess fondant stay on the toothpick, and you don't want to get that inside your jar when you go to dip your toothpick in there again. Okay, this is getting there. So I've actually pre-colored all of my other fondant just so you don't have to watch me do so many different colors. And then I'll show you in a bit how you can adjust the shade. So you're not having to mix so many colors from scratch. So that's pretty good. Any more questions on coloring the fondant, Robin, before we move on?
Well, you might talk a little bit about how the gel food coloring really is concentrated, and you get a nice dip, how awesome it is to color, nice, deep, rich colors versus the pastels.
It's very highly concentrated, and it comes in so many different colors. It's nice that you're not having to guess what color combinations you have to do to get maybe purple. And there's like 3 or 4 different shades of blue, so you don't have to try to figure out how to get that particular shade. You can just look for that color jar in the store or online. Okay, so I want to show you another cool little coloring technique that we're going to use to make our fall leaves. So I actually have some red, orange, and yellow that I've already pre-colored, and we're going to do like a marble effect with these. So to do that, we're just going to roll these in little logs here, and then we're just going to put them together and twist them, fold them, twist them again and fold them. You don't want to go crazy doing too much folding and twisting, because if you do mess with it too much, you're going to end up with it all blending together and creating a single color. What we're trying to do here is kind of keep a contrast between the 3 colors. And now I'm going to roll it out to show you what kind of an effect we can get. So
will the colors dry darker, or will they lighten up at all once the fondant dries a little bit?
Yeah, great question. They will actually intensify a little bit as it sits. The same will happen with your icing as well. If you're using the icing colors to to color regular icing, the same thing will happen. So it's nice if you do have the time to pre-color everything before you want to start your project. Even do it the day before. So then when you go to start your project, you can take a look and see how much that color has intensified. If it's not quite where you want it, you can always go ahead and add more color.
There's one more question, Tiffany.
Sure.
If your fondant is a little bit sticky, what should you do? Somebody's asking if you put it in the refrigerator, or what should you do?
No, what you can do if it's a little bit sticky is you can just add a little bit of cornstarch or powdered sugar. And that's actually a good question I want to bring up. The fact that you can also make your own fondant from scratch. Wilton.com has a great recipe for a marshmallow fondant. However, if you've never worked with fondant before, I would really recommend starting out with the Decorator Preferred Fondant like I'm using here, only because sometimes that homemade fondant, you have to do some adjusting of the consistency. And if you're not used to working with it, you might not really know, does it need to be, do we need to add a little more powder to it? So this way, the Decorator Prefer is always a great consistency to work with. It really doesn't give you much trouble. Depending on the climate you're in, that can change it up a little bit and making it a little more challenging. But typically, if you just add that powdered sugar or cornstarch, that usually takes care of that stickiness. You could also just put a tiny bit of white vegetable shortening on your hands or on your surface, and that will help prevent the sticking too. And the shortening will also help if your fondant is starting to dry out a little bit. Okay. All right, so what I want to do now is show you how to cut out some of the leaves for this design here. So you can see we've got some multicolored leaves. So we're just going to use the smallest cutter from this leaf cutout set, just like the round double-sided cutout set that I showed you before. This also has the two sides to it. And I kind of like to mix it up a little bit, and I cut out some with that, that ruffled edge and some with the straight edge. If it ends up sticking, you can just take a knife or a spatula and kind of poke it through. So I think you get the idea here. I'll just do a couple more.
Tiffany, if someone has found that their fondant is kind of hard, what should they do about that to soften it up?
Just try kneading it a little bit longer. Again, you could try just adding a little bit of shortening to your hands when you're kneading it, and that might help. If it gets too hard, it might be to the point where it's just time to grab a fresh pack. Okay, so I've got some leaves cut out. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up what I have left over so that can be reused. Now, what I like to do is actually take the edge of my spatula and just give the center of the leaf a nice little vein, just to give it some added interest. And then I also like to shape them just a little bit so they look a little more dimensional.
Tiffany, will icing color stain your hands? Do you suggest that people use disposable gloves, or?
It can. I like to use the disposable gloves for some of the really dark colors, like if I'm trying to mix a black or maybe a red. It does wash out of your hands, but some of those darker colors may stay on your hands a little bit longer. So it is nice if you do have the disposable food safe gloves handy. If you don't, I don't know if you noticed when I was mixing in the color, I tried to not touch the color directly with my hands. I put it in the center of the fondant and then just folded it in half to kind of seal in the color into the center, and then twist it and fold it. And that way you're not coming in direct contact with the color.
Okay.
Okay.
Someone's asking if your camera could be any closer. I don't know if that's possible or not, but
Sure, we can give that a try. Is that any better?
maybe a little. We'll see how it's asking for closer, please.
Okay. We'll see how that is. All right. So what you can do to kind of give your leaves some dimension is just kind of play with them a little bit and, you know, twist them, maybe where that seam is that we just made with the spatula, you can fold that up a little bit, just so they're not so flat. Hopefully you can see that in the camera there. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to take a plain cookie here, and we're going to roll out the large circle here, and then we'll start applying our leaves.
So, before you do that, could you just pick up a leaf and like maybe put it a little bit closer to the camera just so that they can get at least one really good close-up view? Oh, there you go.
Sure. So they bend really easy. You can kind of, you know, manipulate it to whatever shape you want just to give it some added dimension.
Awesome.
Okay.
What did you put on the roll and cut mat? Was that powdered sugar or cornstarch?
I happen to be using cornstarch today, but you could use powdered sugar. That works fine as well. So what I did to get this color is I just took a very tiny touch of brown icing color and a little tiny bit of the yellow. And what we end up with is sort of like an ivory or a very light yellow color. So I'm just going to dust my surface and knead this up real quick. Again, anytime you go to do anything with fondant, you always want to knead it up first so it's nice and soft. And then I'm just going to roll this out. What's great about this particular little roller is it has these little guide rings on the sides. You just want to try to make sure that you're keeping your fondant within those guide rings. And the guide rings are going to help to get a nice even thickness. These are actually to help you roll out to a 1/16 of an inch thickness in case you're using a regular rolling pin. Oops. And when you're rolling, you don't want to keep flipping over your fondant like this. If you're afraid it's going to start to stick, you can pick it up and kind of rotate it like this, but I wouldn't flip it over. All right, so that looks pretty good. So whatever size cutter you used to cut out your cookie, you're going to want to use that same cutter to cut out the fondant circle that you're going to place on top. So again, I'm going to just take my excess fondant and tuck that away so it doesn't dry out. Now to apply this to the cookie, because we're working on a dry surface here, we're actually going to use a little piping gel to attach this to the cookie. So for those of you that might not be familiar with piping gel, it comes in a little container like this. You can get this at Michael's. You can apply it with either a spatula. I happen to have just a flat decorator brush that I'm using. So I'm just going to take a little bit and brush it on my cookie. And you don't need a lot. And this is just clear. It's like a clear edible glue. It doesn't really have much of a taste at all. You could use icing if you wanted to. You just need to be real careful with the icing because if you put too much on, it's going to kind of show through. It'll kind of show through lumpy on, on the fondant. So the piping gel is nice because it spreads real easy and it'll go on really thin.
So could you use water?
Not on a dry surface, but you could use water as your way to attach fondant if you're trying to glue together fondant on fondant. So in other words, I'll show you when we do our stems on our acorns and the pumpkin, you could just use water to attach the two pieces of fondant together. But on a dry surface, you really need a little more help to help that stay attached. Okay. All right, so before we add our leaves, I'm going to show you how I did the little acorns. So I've actually got two different colors of brown here. So I started out with, I've got a light brown, and then I took some more after I colored it and just added more brown to it to kind of get a little bit of a contrast. So to do an acorn, I would take about a 1/2 inch ball of brown fondant. And this is probably going to be too big. I do have a ruler here just to kind of, that is going to be too much.
Tiffany, can you move your hand just a little bit more forward? And also, can you explain, does fondant stay soft, or does it get dry as it sits? And can you use it like on cake or cupcakes?
You can use it on cake and cupcakes. You can use it to cover a cake. You could put a topper on the top of the cupcake, just like I did here with the cookie. In that case, you would probably apply a light coat of icing first, and then put that on rather than using the piping gel. It's never going to get really hard once it's sitting on your treat. It's not going to like be crunchy when you bite into it, but it will start to I hate to use the word harden, but it'll set up a little bit. So it's not going to end up staying as soft as it is right now. Once it sits for a bit, it will start to set up a little bit, but not to the point where it's going to be hard when you bite into it. In fact, now might be a good time to mention that if you do want to put a message or a name on your cookie, I would recommend doing this step maybe the day before you actually need your cookies, because you are going to want this part to set up just a little bit, because when you go to write on the cookie, the tip is going to sink into the fondant, and it'll almost like stop dead in its tracks, if you understand what I mean there. And so you're not going to have nice clean lines, because this will be so soft if you do it when the fondant is freshly put on. Okay. All right, so here is our light brown fondant. That looks like a pretty good size. So to shape it, I'm just going to start to pinch one end of it. So it kind of comes to a point, and I'll set it down like this so the other end kind of flattens out a little bit. And you'll just sit there and play with it until it ends up looking like a cone. Hopefully you can see that. Then to make the little top for the acorn, you're going to grab the darker brown fondant. And you just need a very small amount, probably a little bit smaller than a pea. That's probably going to be too much. And roll it up into a ball. And then you want to form that into a cone. You almost want it to look like a little chocolate chip. So this is going to be the stem that we're going to attach to the top. And then for the little hat that we're going to put on it, or the little cap, start out with a slightly smaller amount than we used for the actual acorn. Roll it in a ball. And then just use your finger to kind of flatten it out. And this might actually be a little too big. I kind of just place my acorn on it. You want it to be a little bit bigger than the dimension of the acorn. I'm going to just take a little bit off here. And again, we'll just roll that into a ball, flatten it out with our hand. If it sticks to your finger, you could just take a little bit of cornstarch or powdered sugar and dab your finger, and that will prevent it from sticking. All right, so that looks pretty good. So to secure that, this is where you could just take a little bit of water and put that on. So you'll notice that I'm using these decorator brushes. These are not your regular paint brush that you would have sitting in with your craft supplies. You want to make sure that you're using a food safe brush. The ones that I'm using today are part of a set that's available at Michael's. You'll find it right in the food crafting aisle where all the fondant supplies are. So what I'm doing now is I'm just kind of working the top on and kind of rolling over the top so it's coming down a little bit on the side there. And then I'm just going to use the end of my decorator brush, indent a little spot to place our little stem or our chocolate chip shape there. And again, you could just use a tiny dab of water. It doesn't take much at all. And that can set right in there. And once you get it in, you might need to just play with it to reshape it just a tiny bit. And there we have our little acorn. Okay, so what we can do next is I have some already made up too. We can just go ahead and take some piping gel and apply these to the cookie. So what I like to do first is apply the decorations and then go back and add the name like the day after. Again, so once the fondant has set up, you'll get a nice cleaner line when you're trying to write the name. So I'm just applying a little bit of piping gel on the bottom of these. And then, you can play with the leaves to kind of reshape them so they're not lying so flat. Can everyone see okay?
I think so. Looks good.
Okay. Oops. If you're doing a larger cookie, you could certainly add maybe one more acorn. It's really just going to depend on the size of the cookie. I just wouldn't go any smaller than like 2.5 inches because that's even a tiny bit smaller than what I'm using. So it's really going to limit you to how much you can put on here. Oops. Okay. So there we have that. I actually have one that I made ahead of time where I did let the fondant set up a little bit. So I'll show you how I added the name. So what I have here is a FoodWriter. This is part of a 5-pack of different colors. I know it looks like a normal marker that you'd have in your junk drawer or with your craft supplies, but this is actually a food safe marker. So it comes in a package with black, green, blue, red, and I'm going to use the brown one to add a name. And you'll just write just like you normally would on paper. What you might even want to do first is kind of test out how you want it to look on there. So what you might even want to do is take like a pen or a pencil and trace your cutter. So that's the size of your cookie. Figure this is about where your design is. And then you can actually practice how you want this to look so you know kind of how big to write your message. Okay, and that trick works too, if you're working on a cake surface and you need to write happy birthday. Sometimes it helps if you trace the size pan and then just, do it on paper first so you have a better idea.
A couple questions, Tiffany.
Yep.
Okay, so can you use edible glitter or any kind of like dusting powder, anything over the top of the fondant?
You could, absolutely, yep. And
Okay.
that should just brush on. You shouldn't need to use any kind of piping gel or anything. It should just stay on when you apply it with a brush or spray it on.
Okay. And then how do you clean the tip of the FoodWriter after you have used it? Do you need to do anything special?
Not if you're using it on fondant, the fondant is dry enough that it's not going to pick up any of the food. If you do get, say, maybe some icing or piping gel on it, I would probably just take like a paper towel and just kind of dab the tip a little bit to get that food off of there. But typically you're going to use a fairly dry surface whenever you're writing with these FoodWriters.
Okay, and I know you talked a little bit about the cookies earlier that people might use, but someone's asking whether or not you could, use this type of design on any kind of a drop cookie. Or is there?
You probably could, although the fondant isn't going to lie nice and flat. Like if you wanted to skip covering the circle part and just maybe apply some leaves or something, you could probably do that. I just think it's going to look a little bit better if you're building it on a flatter surface.
Sure. And did you say 24, let the fondant sit for 24 hours before you write on it, or how long was that?
Ideally, yeah, if you could let it sit for up to 24 hours, that would be great. Otherwise, I would say a good 6 to 8 hours. Otherwise, it's just going to be a little too soft. No matter how light you apply the tip, it'll still sink into that fondant if the fondant hasn't set yet. And what ends up happening is it just, like I said, it stops you in your tracks, and then you kind of got to pick up where you left off, and you're just going to end up with lines that won't look very clean. Okay. All right. Are we ready to move on to our next design here? So we've got some pumpkins and some corn to create next. So let's start with the pumpkins. You'll need some orange fondant for that. And we're going to use about the same amount that we did for the acorns. Start with about a 1/2 inch ball. And again, you'll want to make sure that you knead that a little bit before you do anything with it. That's going to be a little bit big. So roll that up into a ball. And then I just take the back of my decorator brush and indent at the top. That's where we're going to drop our little stem in just a moment. Then if you take a toothpick, you can just go around the side and sort of imprint some lines, maybe 5 or 6, just go around the whole ball there.
Tiffany, is your sugar cookie recipe one that's on the Wilton website?
It is. There's a few different rollout cookie recipes that you'll find on wilton.com. Yep. Okay, so there's our pumpkin. What we're going to do next is just add a little stem. So I would take just a little tiny piece of the light brown that we used for the base of the acorn. And you don't need more than, say, a pea size. A very small amount. And just roll that up, and then we're going to kind of form it into a log. Take a little tiny dab of water, put that in that indentation that we made, and then we can actually, I'm going to take a little bit more off our stem here. So that fits nicely into that little hole. Okay, so there is our little pumpkin. And now we'll do the corn husk. So you'll need a little piece of yellow. I would say about a 1/2-inch ball again. Just about everything we're doing today is starting out with a 1/2-inch ball. So the acorns, the corn, and the pumpkin all start with about the same amount. Then from here, we're just going to roll that into a log. You want your log to be about 1 inch long. And if you happen to have a roll and cut mat, you can probably see the little squares here. These come in handy because they're all little 1-inch squares. So it's almost like having a built-in ruler. So that's about the size of the corn that we want. And then we can take our toothpick again, and we're just going to add some lines to this for some vertical lines all the way around, and then some horizontal lines just to kind of give it the appearance of corn kernels. And you're going to lose the shape a little bit as you're poking it, so you might need to just reshape it a little bit. So I'll try to hold this up so you can see how there's the appearance of like corn kernels there. So that's all just shaped with the toothpick. So to give it the little corn husk, I'm going to take just some very light brown here, almost more like a beige color, but I made it with the brown icing color.
Tiffany, can you freeze these cookies or refrigerate them? Like if you decorated them and you wanted to keep them for a while, how would you?
Well, you could freeze the cookies, but I would not really recommend freezing them with the decoration. I don't know how well they would hold up. I can tell you that you can freeze fondant if you have some left over and you're not going to have a need to use it in, say, the next couple of months. You could wrap it up and put it in the freezer. I just don't know how well. I think it would be hard to wrap these up well and freeze them that way. So you could make the cookies ahead of time, freeze those, and then maybe just do the decorating a day or two before the occasion. Okay, so to do the corn husk, what we're going to use is another cutout set. This is the star shapes. So again, there's 6 different sizes. We are going to use the smallest star out of here.
Tiffany, one more question about
Sure.
Once the design's made, can
Yeah.
you put these like in a little gift bag or, like stack them without the decorations being squished?
Yeah, you could. I wouldn't do it right after you've made them because like I explained before, if you're going to write on them and you want to have this part set up, you should let your decorations set up too, because if we immediately tried to stack these after we just made the pumpkins, like with the stems, if you put any weight on this, what would probably happen is the little stems would kind of smush down. So, it really depends on how much weight you're going to put on them. Okay, so in general, I would try not to stack them, but if you absolutely have to, I would not go more than just one on top of the other. And you would definitely have to let your decorations dry at least a day so they set up a little bit so they don't lose their shape when you put any weight on it. Okay, all right, so I've just dusted my surface and I am going to roll out a little piece for the husk. Okay, and then I'm just going to take my decorator brush again with a tiny dab of water, put that right in the center. And then I'm just going to wrap this around the end of my corn like this. And then you could just add some lines to the corn husk with your, oops, sliding out there. I think I actually got a little too much water in here, so it didn't adhere very well. You almost just want like a damp brush. So you can add.
Can you bring it a little closer to the camera? There you go. Thank you.
Okay. So just add some lines with your toothpick. And then because I've been handling this, I'm going to go ahead and add some more corn kernels here. And there's our little corn husk. Okay, so we can go and start decorating the cookie now. So what I did to get this color is I just took some red and added a little bit to the to some white fondant to kind of get a lighter color. And it actually ended up brightening up quite a bit after it sat overnight. So that just goes to show why if you've got the time to pre-color everything the day before you need it, you'll be able to get a better idea of how it's going to come out. So now I'm just going to take the red and blend it in with some more white fondant here. And again, we want to keep this covered up in a baggie so that doesn't dry out. I'm just going to knead this white up before I add the red to it. So this is how you can get, lighter or darker shades just by adjusting the amount of color that you're adding to the white.
We need you to move your hands a little bit. There you go. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so that's pretty well blended. I'm going to go ahead and dust my surface. And we're going to roll this out. We just want to make sure it's at least as large as the diameter of our cookie. And for those of you that don't have this nice little 9-inch roller with the guide rings, if you're using a regular rolling pin, you want to go to about a 1/16 of an inch thickness. So I'm just going to take my cutter that I used for the cookie and cut out my circle. And we'll apply a little piping gel. And center that right on there. Okay. And now we can add our pumpkins. And again, I'm just gonna add those with a little bit of piping gel to help those stick. And then you can add some leaves. The number of leaves that you add is really going to depend on the size cookie you have and whether or not you did want to personalize it with either, some kind of a message or someone's name. What's great about making designs like this is when you're working with fondant, you can actually make all the decorations ahead of time. So you're not spending so much time the day that you need them. You could even bake your cookies ahead and have those in the freezer, have all your leaves cut out and your pumpkins and acorns and corn all made. Oops. Ahead of time, and so then the day that you need them, you can just do a really quick assembly. Good. So there is that design.
So, Tiffany, all right. Can you flavor fondant, whether it's the Wilton fondant or marshmallow fondant? Can you add any other type of flavoring to it?
You certainly can. So the Decorator Preferred Fondant is sort of a vanilla flavor. There is one kind that it's the brown color that's actually a chocolate flavor. It tastes a lot like a Tootsie Roll. So any of you that love Tootsie Rolls, you're going to love that brown fondant. But if you prefer to give your fondant a different flavor, you can just add a little bit of extract to it, or you could use the Wilton Treatology color or flavorings, and you would just knead that into the fondant. You just want to be careful not to add a lot, because that's liquid that you're adding to the fondant, and again, that's going to change the consistency a little bit and make it a little more sticky. Okay. If you're covering a cake with fondant, you could also add that flavoring to the icing, because you would typically ice a cake first before you put that layer of fondant over it. So if you're adding more flavoring to the buttercream that you're icing the cake in, the fondant will actually absorb some of that flavor from the buttercream. It'll kind of soak it up like a sponge.
Tiffany, when you're rolling out the fondant on the roll and cut mat, could you use like a pie crust mat versus the roll and cut mat, or is the one you're using specific?
No, you could use a like a pie crust mat if you want. Sure. Okay, so we are ready to do our final design here, the sunflower. So I'm going to just take a little piece of the dark brown, and we're going to do a slightly smaller center for the sunflower, just because we need to leave some space to add our petals. So for the center of the sunflower, I'm going to be using the second smallest round cutter from that double cutout set. And then we'll apply this the same way we did with the others, but because I'm using a much smaller surface here than the cookie, I'm actually going to put it directly on the fondant instead. And I'm going to center that. Okay, and now we are ready to do our leaves. So you all actually saw when I cut out the leaves earlier using the smallest leaf cutter. So I am going to just go ahead and use some leaves that, or some petals that I had made previously using this same leaf cutter. When you cut them though, I would use the straight edge. Okay, and then I actually went ahead and used a spatula to add that center vein in there, just like I did with the leaves. And what we're going to do is just attach these with some piping gel around the whole edge here of the cookie. I think you get the idea here. For the size cookie that I did, which was, again, the largest cutter from that double cutout set, it's 1 5/8. It takes about 13 of these little leaves to get the petals to go all the way around the cookie. So once you've completed the layer around here, you're going to go back with a second layer on top, but you want to stagger them. So when you go to place that one on top, put it so it's in between the two petals below it.
Tiffany, would you have time to show them how to roll out and cut one more petal? There's someone that would like to see that one more.
I sure can. Yep, be happy to. So I'm just going to take some yellow fondant. Make sure you knead it up good first. Dust the surface. And you'll just use your rolling pin to roll that out to about 1/8 of an inch thickness. And again, if you're using this particular roller, it's got the guide rings that will help you to get the perfect height that you need, or perfect thickness. And then I'm just using the smaller cutter, the smallest cutter, it's green, from the double cutout set here. And I'm using the straight side, not that ruffled or scalloped side. And then you would just cut it. And I kind of give it a little turn just to help get a nice clean cut. Chances are it will stick into the cutter. So I just take a spatula or a knife, pop it out. And then I like to add a little center vein to it, again, just for some added interest. And there is your petal. So I would recommend just cutting out a whole bunch of these ahead of time, and then you can go back and add them to your flower, you know, just before you're ready to serve them. So I think you get the idea here. You would just go around with that second layer and you'll end up with this. This one's going to be a little harder to put any kind of a message on it, simply because it's such a dark color in the center and it's such a small area to work with. So if you're looking to use these for the place cards, I would recommend you know, doing these designs here. Okay. Any other questions? No?
Not seeing anything. Can you move the plate over just a little bit? There you go, so
Sure.
everybody can see it. Yeah, so we have, how long can you keep the decorated fondant before you serve it? Is there like a...
Well, if you have leftover fondant, it will last good 3 to 4 weeks. In fact, I'll show you how you can wrap it up so it will, so it won't dry out and get too hard on you. But as far as the cookies go, I would probably try to serve those within 3 to 4 days. The fondant's not going to really go bad. If anything, it's going to be the cookies aren't going to stay that fresh. But the fondant doesn't go bad. It'll just start to get a little dry.
Tiffany, if you do the cutouts in advance, how would you keep them like overnight before you actually put them on the cookie?
I would just store them in an airtight container, or you could freeze them. You could just, again, put them in a nice airtight container. I'd probably put a piece of wax paper in between your layers if you're gonna, you know, layer them, and then just bring them out to room temperature before you add your fondant to them.
Okay. Is fondant really sweet? How would you compare the sugar content between fondant and buttercream icing? Is it pretty similar?
It has a very different taste. I don't think fondant has that much of a taste. You know, that's why you might want to add your flavoring to it. As far as sweetness, I don't think it tastes as sweet as buttercream, but that's my opinion. I think more than anything, people are surprised at the texture of it. It's almost like biting into a fresh piece of gum. I don't want to say it's chewy, but it's going to be soft. It's not going to be creamy like an icing, you know, like a buttercream icing would be. So it's the consistency that's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. I personally don't think it tastes quite as sweet as the same amount of buttercream icing.
Can you show the cookies again? Everybody wants to see another.
Sure, you want to do a close-up view of that? Oops, let's see here. Okay, and then I will show you how you can properly prepare your fondant to any leftovers that you have. So here's my leftover fondant. So what I have here is just some white vegetable shortening that you want to take and coat your ball with just a very thin layer of the shortening. And what that's that's going to do, it's going to seal in the moisture so it won't dry out the fondant. And as long as you coat it with the shortening and then go ahead and wrap it up with a piece of plastic wrap it up tightly, and then take this and put it in either a resealable baggie or a plastic container, then it will last at least 3 to 4 weeks. Again, it doesn't really go bad. What will eventually start to happen is it's going to dry out. So when you go to roll it out or shape it, it just might not cooperate quite as much because it's not going to be soft and pliable. When that happens, then it's time just to start with a fresh pack. If you think it's going to be several months before you're going to use your leftover fondant, then you could just pop it in the freezer. Again, you still want to put that coat of shortening on it and wrap it in the plastic wrap and then put it in that airtight container or resealable bag. Put it in the freezer, and then before you go to use it, you'll just want to bring that back out to room temperature and it'll be good to use. So you'll get several months out of it if you want to put it in the freezer.
But Tiffany, can piping gel be frozen? And do you have any idea what like the shelf life would be on piping gel? Does it need to be
piping gel, like the Icing Color, has a very long shelf life. I don't know the exact shelf life, but I want to say that I've kept it for 12 months and it's been fine. I've never tried to freeze it before. I don't see why you couldn't freeze it. I don't know if anybody out there uses piping gel, that maybe you've tried to freeze it before. Put in the chat box if you have frozen it. I would think that you probably could. Like the Icing Color, though, you really should be careful that when you're using it, you don't keep dipping your spatula or brush into it after it's touched food. So I don't know if you happen to notice, but I took some out of its original container and put it into a separate little cup because I didn't want, after I brushed a cookie with it, I don't want to get some of those cookie particles into the container. That will make it spoil more quickly.
So do you have to keep it in the refrigerator once you open it, or can it just be in your pantry?
You do not have to refrigerate it. You can keep it out in room temperature, and same goes with the fondant. If you have leftover fondant, once you've properly prepared it for storage, it can just stay at room temperature.
Great.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed today's class. I just want to remind you that, again, it will be posted on YouTube probably by tomorrow, or you'll be able to find it on on Michaels.com, by early next week. And then I want to let you know that I will be doing one more class before the holidays to help you with your holiday cookie decorating. I'll be doing a painting on fondant cookies next month. That'll be on Friday, December 11th at 12 Central. You can register for that class, the same place on Michaels.com that you registered for today's class. So I do hope I'll see you then, but in the meantime, I wish you sweet success with whatever you decide to bake and decorate next. Thanks, guys. Bye.